Our second scripture reading is from the second chapter of the book of Joshua. The words that would have been up on the screen are from a different Bible translation than what I'm going to read from. So we're not going to have the words up on the screen because I don't want your eyes and your ears having conflicting information. So listen for the word of the Lord. And it was told to the king of Jericho, saying, "Behold, men have come here this night from the children of Israel to search the land." And the king of Jericho sent to Rahab, saying, "Bring forth the men who have come to you, that have entered your house, for they have come to search out the entire land." Now the woman, Rahab, had taken 2 men, and she had hidden them. And so she said, "Indeed, the men came to me, but I did not know from where they were. And it was time to close the gate. At darkness that the men went out. I do not know where they went. Pursue after them quickly, for you will overtake them." And she had brought them up to the roof, and she hid them with the stalks of flax that she had laid arranged upon the roof. And the men pursued them in the direction toward the Jordan to the fords. And as soon as the pursuers had gone out, they shut the gate. And before they were asleep, she came up to them on the roof. And she said to the men, "I know that the Lord has given you the land, and that your terror is fallen upon us, and that all the inhabitants of the land have melted away because of you. For we have heard how the Lord dried up the water of the sea for you when you came out of Egypt, and what you did to the 2 kings of the Amorites that were on the other side of the Jordan, whom you completely destroyed. And as soon as we heard, our hearts melted, nor did there remain any more spirit in any man because of you. For the Lord your God, he is God in heaven above and on earth below. And now I pray, swear to me by the Lord, since I have showed you kindness, that you will also show kindness to my father's house, and give me a true token. And you shall preserve alive my father and my mother, and my brothers and my sisters, and all that they have, and you shall deliver our lives from death." And the men answered her, "Our life for yours, if you will not tell this, our discussion. And it shall be that when the Lord gives us this land, that we will deal with you with kindness and truth." And so she let them down by a rope through the window. For her house was in the town wall, and she dwelt within the wall. And she said to them, "Go to the mountain, lest the pursuers meet you, and hide yourselves there 3 days, until the pursuers return, and afterwards go your way." And the men said to her, "We will be blameless of this oath which you made us swear. Behold, when we come into the land, you shall bind this line of scarlet thread in the window by which you let us down. And you shall bring your father and your mother and your brothers and all of your father's household home to you. And it shall be that whoever goes out of these doors of your house, his blood shall be upon his head, and we will be blameless. And that whosoever shall be with you in this house, his blood shall be upon our head, if any hand be laid upon him. And if you tell of this our discussion, then we will be blameless of your oath, which you have made us swear." And she said, "According to your words, so be it." And she sent them away, and they departed. And she bound the scarlet line in the window. And they went and came to the mountain and stayed there 3 days until the pursuers returned. And the pursuers sought them throughout all the way, but they did not find them. This too is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. So today's sermon starts a sermon series on women of the Old Testament. And this particular sermon about Rahab deals with a topic we talk about all the time in church, are completely comfortable with, and that we discuss openly in social events. Prostitution. I don't like to assume many things, but I assume you are all aware that prostitution can take on many different shapes and forms, but it looks far less like Julia Roberts in Pretty Woman than we could ever even imagine. Prostitution destroys a person's agency over their own body and turns something God has created into a tool for others to use and misuse for their own personal gain. But there is a kind of a Pretty Woman scenario in the story of Rahab here in the Bible. Some Bible translations call her a prostitute. Others, like the English translation of the Jewish Bible I read this morning, call her an innkeeper. And I could spend an hour debating whether she was this or that, but there's an interesting thing here in that prostitution is not just defined in the Bible as selling one's body for money. It's also defined in Deuteronomy as a metaphor for someone who worships other gods. And that's important because Rahab was a Canaanite woman. And this story takes place about 40 years after the Israelites were in Exodus. So the Israelites have come back. They're beginning to regain control of the Canaan area. And this created conflict, particularly in Jericho, which is where this account takes place. So you've got people already living there, people living in Canaan who worship other gods, and they don't want their land taken away. And then you've got the Israelites who believe that God has given them that land, who worship Yahweh, or who we consider the God of the Bible. And they're trying to take back that land that they feel God has promised them, and either just wipe all the people out and start over, or try to sort of convert them. And poor Rahab is stuck in the middle of that. She lives literally in the wall of Jericho. And she's got a lot of family living nearby. So as a Canaanite woman, she doesn't worship Yahweh, the God of the Bible. She worships a different set of gods, plural gods. And she has just as much at stake here as the other Canaanites. So meanwhile, the king of Jericho gets wind that there are spies who have just come into town and who are likely staying with Rahab. Now, what the king doesn't know is that Rahab has hidden them on the roof among these stalks of flax that she's sort of laid out strategically to cover them up. So the king sends his men to go knocking on her door, and Rahab says, well, yeah, I've seen them, but I don't know where they've come from or where they went, even though she does. So she sends the king's men to pursue these spies, and as soon as they leave Jericho, she closes the city gate. She then has this long monologue of 6 verses which is really unusual for women in the Bible, acknowledging as a Canaanite that the land rightfully belongs to the Israelites because God has given it to them. And she recounts all the stories she's heard about their journey, about the Red Sea and so forth. She then asks that in exchange for her kindness to them, for her hiding them on the roof and not turning them in, that they return the same kindness to her and her family when the Israelites come to overtake Jericho. The spies swear her to secrecy that none of this even happened, and then they grant her that promise. So once the king's men are gone, Rahab drops them down from the roof by a rope and sends them in the opposite direction than the king's men. And before they go, they give her a red cord to hang in her window, which indicates when the Israelites come to take Jericho, everyone who comes out of that door underneath that red cord is safe and not to be killed. So everything then comes to pass as expected. Rahab and her family are welcomed into the Israelite community after Jericho is destroyed because she saved those spies, which is pretty heroic for a prostitute who worships these other gods. And that's exactly why her being a prostitute is important. Whether she was a prostitute because she sold her body for money, or because she worshipped gods who weren't Yahweh, what she did and how she was treated were remarkable. She had so much working against her, but she took charge of her own life, had her own agency, and made and kept her own promises without a father, brother, husband to intervene. Now today, that's no big deal. Women do that all the time. But in Bible days, that's pretty epic. And later in the New Testament, Rahab is listed in the genealogy of Jesus. So she wasn't just some woman who did this cool thing this one time. She was a hero. And she saved not only herself, but her entire family. She got to be the hero in her own story, in her own life. And very few women had that chance and that opportunity in those days when women had no education, no power in society, and were treated almost like property. Oh, and she was a prostitute, maybe. So agency in life, or sort of the ability to make decisions and control what happens to us, is a point of privilege that few of us understand until we lose it. The poor have far fewer choices than we have, that many of us have. People of color have a different amount of agency in society, in a society that's historically structured to work against them. And so, to put it in a different way, agency is kind of like being in the hospital. If Dr. X says you go for a test, you go for a test. You probably don't understand what the test is or what it's actually going to tell the doctor. But doctor said it, so you go. Someone tells you when to eat, someone tells you when to bathe, and depending on what you're in the hospital for, you may have very little control over what even happens when with your own bodily functions. You're basically held hostage until somebody tells you you can leave. And so that feeling of being under someone else's control is a lack of agency. because you aren't in control of your own daily life as a patient in the hospital. You are at the mercy and the discretion of others. And that is the life of a woman in Old Testament times. Others, whether it was a male family member or the local or regional government, controlled most of what you were able to do. So whether you are a woman or not, however you identify, take inspiration from Rahab. What in your life could you take control of to make things better for yourself and for others? Where are your spies coming from? And what are you going to do once they get to you? Are you going to uphold the promises you make, even though it's really easy for somebody you don't know to go back on their word? And who deserves your thanks when things work out? So thank God for your agency. Thank God that you can make some or all of the decisions for yourself, or that you have other people that you trust to make good decisions for you. Though some of us have more freedoms than others, God gave Rahab free will, and God gave us free will. Thanks be to God for the heroes in the Old Testament, male, female, whatever. Amen.